Hello friends, this is Grief speaking. Today we're looking at Double Walker by Michael Conrad with art by Noah Bailey. I stumbled upon this comic months ago and it really stuck with me. If you've watched this channel for a while, you know I love folk horror and this is one of the best I've read in a long time. A married couple go on vacation in Scotland where they are entrenched in folk legends of the Fae. After they suffer a terrible tragedy in the Scottish Highlands, everything begins to unravel. Bodies are being found ripped to pieces, and let's just say Scotland's fairies are scary as hell. I will warn you, this comic is pretty dark in every regard, and you might shy away if you're squeamish. But otherwise, let's get into it. This is Double Walker Explained. The comic begins with a man standing under dark skies on the side of a hill. He's staring down at what looks like a puddle when two men approach in the distance and call out to him from the dense fog. The older of the two insists that the man step away from the pool, but he looks deeper into the water and says, "She's in there." This is intentionally confusing, but trust me, it will all make sense soon enough. Next, we're told a story about a massive old man the size of St. Mary's, a naked giant lumbering through the Scottish Highlands until finally he collapses. He's dying, and this is his final resting place. Over time, his body formed into a mountain and became the Old Man of Storr, a very real structure in the Isle of Skye, Scotland, that does seem to resemble the bones of giants. The storyteller says that Fae folk feast on the old man's corpse, and they say its meat is running out, so they might grab up a couple of Americans for a cheeky nibble. She continues saying there are all kinds of beasts out there in Storr. They even have the devil himself turned into a dire horse by a pope or necromancer, and fairy pools that lead to their world. Finally, we get eyes on the storyteller, an older woman named Miss Deidre. She runs a bed and breakfast and is actually telling all of this to a young American couple that's staying with her, Coley and Gemma. Coley says it sounds bloody brilliant and he can't wait to check out Storr for himself. His wife Gemma makes fun of him for saying bloody brilliant after only visiting London for a day and a half, and they all laugh. It seems like the trip is off to a great start. The next day, they get a picture in front of Loch Ness and explore the rest of the area a bit. This is where we learn that Gemma is pregnant, and this trip to the UK is a sort of baby moon. Later, they check out a local pub and have some friendly conversation with the locals, though Coley gets roasted once again for calling everyone mate. He might as well wear a neon sign on his chest that says tourist. Either way, they're having a good time, and they ask about the old man of the store. One of the local guys says it's a bit windy, but shouldn't be any trouble for them. Coley orders himself a scotch and gives cheers to Scotland and the old man, excited to make the hike the next day. It cuts once again to Coley standing over the strange pool of water, and then a dramatic title reveal, Double Walker. The next day, Coley and Gemma are dropped off at the foot of the hill. It's sprinkling out, and the driver warns them it'll likely start raining harder soon, so they better hurry if they want to make it all the way up. Gemma says they should have gotten here earlier, the sun's going down soon, but Coley insists it was worth it to stop and see all the castles on the way. Well, they chug along, but of course the hill is quite steep in some areas, and now it's muddy as well. Finally, Gemma tells Coley she thinks she's done. She's not feeling well and isn't sure she can make it. He tries encouraging her to go a little further. This will likely be the only chance they'll ever have to climb it. Gemma tells him to just go on ahead and she'll wait here. He pushes back one more time, but finally climbs up the hill alone, leaving Gemma to try and find a place to pee in the grass. Coley fights the rain and wind until he finally makes it to the top of the store. It's a magnificent view as lightning cracks in the distance behind the old rocks. After taking a couple of disappointing selfies, Coley hastily makes his way down the hill until he spots Gemma collapsed in the grass with wide eyes. You might notice at the edge of the panels here that she was laying by a circular pool of water, but Coley thinks nothing of it as he's in a full panic. He picks up his wife and somehow manages to get back to the car as night falls and the storm rages on. The next page is a startling contrast as Coley sits in a brightly lit waiting room at the hospital. He's wrapped in a blanket and has huge bags under his eyes. Finally, the doctor comes out to speak with him, telling him that his wife is fine, but unfortunately, they lost the baby. Coley drives Gemma home through the rain and tells her he loves her, but she's stone silent and staring blankly out the window. Back at the bed and breakfast, Coley manages to get some sleep, but is cursed with a terrible nightmare. He chases a silhouetted man through the hills, and when he catches him, he finds it only to be himself, muttering in a strange language. He wakes up to find Gemma standing in the bathroom staring into the mirror. Coley walks over to her and tells her yesterday was hard, but they can get through this together. Gemma barely responds and continues staring at the mirror, so Coley figures she might just need some space. In the morning, he brings Gemma some breakfast in bed cooked up by Miss Deidre, and she devours it in a matter of seconds, immediately asking for more. So Coley runs out to grab some groceries, and on his way back has a chat with Deidre before heading inside. He tells her they had a rough night and didn't get much to eat. and she says she warned them the Fae don't always like Americans poking around in the Highlands. They mostly do mischief, but every once in a while they secret away a human child and replace it with one of their own. Miss Deidre is just being playful, but obviously it's the worst thing she could have said right now. Coley tells her what happened and she feels terrible. He starts to head inside, but Deidre tells him that Gemma actually left while he was gone. He figures she just needs a walk after what happened and waits up for her. Well, she doesn't come back until that night, and Coley was left worried sick about her, especially since she ignored his calls. She says she lost her phone and hugs him, but we get some quick flashes of what really happened. As she stares off with those wide eyes once again, we see a man's body torn to pieces, his entrails hanging out of his body and his head missing. On the floor, covered in guts, is Gemma's phone. What the hell? Later, two detectives named Mitchell and Patterson, who you may recognize from the opening, arrive at a crime scene. They're handed a cell phone in an evidence bag, and finally take a look inside of a taped-off gas station bathroom where they're bewildered at the gruesome sight inside. In the morning, Coley and Gemma go for a walk, and he says that it's probably best if they head back to the States and chill at home for the next couple of days. Gemma adamantly disagrees and kind of freaks on him, reminding him that her child was just taken from her and she feels like she lost part of herself. She ends by saying that she wants a goddamn drink. So they head back to the pub called the Mangled Stag, and Coley asks the bartender about the fairies. They're obviously a lot scarier in Scotland. Where they come from, they're just butterfly ladies, as Coley describes them. The barman says that they're mostly seen as legend by saner minds, but you won't be finding any sane minds in the Mangled Stag. Coley's fine with that and says that they wouldn't be here if they wanted a sane evening, and Gemma is just knocking them back without a word. The bartender then starts talking about the changelings and gives us some of the legend. He says that the Fae have their own rules and ways, and normally they mind their own. Sometimes if there's a dying Fae child, they make it into a changeling, striking some deal with the moon or some other dark force to make an unholy thing, a mockery of life. Then they seek out a human mother who's got plenty of milk and swap it for the human child. The mother never knows the difference and nurtures this creature while her own child is being feasted upon by the beasts of the moor. However, someone always notices the change eventually, and that's when it gets ugly. We see a woman's husband rip the child from his wife's arms and throw it into a fire, and the bartender says that there aren't happy endings to the fairy tales here in Scotland. Coley sort of uncomfortably laughs the story off, calling the fairies evil, but the bartender says he doesn't think the Fae are concerned with things like good and evil. They're just trying to live. He then tells Coley he might want to keep an eye on his lady, and when Coley gets up to look for her, he finds her talking to a guy in the back, and it looks like she's getting pretty comfortable with him. Coley freaks and cusses the guy out before grabbing Gemma. The guy she was with is clearly confused and just heads off into the men's room. Gemma doesn't really say much, only that she was trying to get to the bathroom, but the whole thing is really weird. Coley tells her to hurry up and go, and then they're leaving, but when he turns around, we can see Gemma slip out of the women's and head into the men's room behind the guy she was with. He assumes she's coming to get some of that exotic Scottish wiener, but he's dead wrong. Gemma starts walking toward him, and as she does, her face seems to change into a nightmare creature. Another patron walks in and sees Gemma standing over the guy's body. He's alive, but he looks terrified. The other man says they need to call the police and shouts for help, but Gemma just eerily stares at him. She meets Coley outside, who tells her she was really out of line in there, and they start back to the B&B. Something is definitely not right with Gemma. She looks spooky as hell, and in the shade we can see her eyes glowing. The next morning, Coley wakes up at 6:16 and meets Gemma and Miss Deidre in the kitchen when there's a knock on the door. It's the two detectives, Mitchell and Patterson. They inform Deidre that there has been some disturbing developments in town. They say they're placing a curfew on the area. No one should be out after dark. As they discuss this, we see a series of highly disturbing images. Two men brutally killed with bones snapped, organs torn out, and heads lopped off and mutilated. Deidre says something kinda eerie here. It's happening again, isn't it? Mitchell tells her to hush that kind of talk and asks for her cooperation in the case, as well as a list of recent lodgers. As the detectives head back to their car, Patterson says he's sure that it's the couple staying here. It's always Americans. Mitchell asks why they aren't taking them into the station then, and Patterson, kissing his cross, says that's not how it works, but he wishes it was. Okay, well that was kind of spooky. Clearly Detective Patterson knows something about what's going on here, and so does Miss Deidre. That evening, Gemma insists they go back to the Stag, and she seems pretty out of it. The bartender takes the opportunity to tell another story about the Fae. This time it's about the Boobry. a strange shape-shifting bird thing that feeds on livestock. But every now and then, its hunger grows greater and it moves on to more satisfying meals. As the bartender tells the story, we see beautiful illustrations of the creature as it stalks a little girl, followed by a group of boobies chasing after a woman. He says shape-changing beasts have a way of getting greedy, and it's best to just let them have their fill and clear out. But of course, everyone tries to fight them. This is a losing game pushing back against such beasts, so you're faced with the choice: die a foolish hero, or realize that the Fae always have their way. As the bartender finishes the story, another patron walks up and grabs a drink, talking about how crazy the lady at the back of the bar is. This is the guy who found Gemma in the bathroom the night before. He says she's a nutter and complains how she left him with a blubbering epileptic in the bathroom. Coley assumes he must be mistaken, and Gemma just dances all creepy on the other side of the bar. The guy tells Coley he better keep an eye on her. She's clearly lost it, and leaves. Coley assumes the guy was just a crazy drunk and doesn't believe a word of it. He orders another beer to cool off and asks the bartender what's going on in town. Is there a killer or what? The bartender looks at him with a serious face and says that some bodies have been turning up. He doesn't know what's been making them, but it's funny how 1 minute you're a person, and just like that, you become a body. Something like this happened a few years back, and he's hesitant to say it's a killer because there wasn't a killer last time. Coley asks if it was suicide then, and the barkeep is pretty vague about what actually happened, just that it was resolved and everyone moved on. He warns Coley to lay low and stay off the streets at night, and also informs him that Gemma just slipped outside by herself. Coley finds her outside and tells her they need to head home, but Gemma tells him she needs to be alone right now. He argues that it's not safe out here, but she's pretty determined to be left alone. At this point, Coley's understandably fed up and sarcastically rages out, saying, "Fine, go get killed by the goddamn Loch Ness Ripper." He at least gives her his phone so she can call for help if needed, then he storms off, saying he'll just be home shitting himself worried if she needs him. Nearby, the detectives watch all of this from their car. Mitchell suggests that they grab Coley now and plant something on him if needed, but Patterson says he's not so sure it's Coley that's behind all of this. Remember, the phone they found belonged to his wife. Maybe she's the one. The segment ends on a horrifying page. More bodies, this time hanging off of a large old tree, and as usual, they're torn to pieces and cut open. The next morning, Coley wakes up at 6:16 again. It's worth noting that there is some relevance to this number. While the number of the beast in Revelation is often translated to 666, there are some translations and early manuscripts that suggest that the number is actually 616. I don't know much about which is more accurate or if this is actually just a coincidence, but it seems strange that Coley continues to wake up at that time, which is closely associated with the devil. Anyway, lying next to him, wide awake, Gemma suddenly sticks her tongue out, which is abnormally long and goes all the way up past her forehead before slithering back into her mouth. Coley doesn't notice this and puts his head in his hands, relieved that Gemma is okay, but frustrated that she never called. He decides to go out and see if he can find some good coffee somewhere and kisses Gemma before leaving. As he steps out, he's confronted by the detectives who ask him if he knows where his wife's been, and he lies, saying she was with him all night. Later, when Coley comes back with the coffee, he tells Gemma about the interaction and then asks her, "Where were you?" She says all she did was go for a walk and calls the cops fools, saying she didn't hurt anyone, even though Coley never suggested that. Elsewhere, at the edge of some woods, the detectives come upon the grisly scene of corpses. Mitchell asks if this is like it was last time. Is it worse? Patterson says it's pretty bad, but they've seen it like this back in the 90s. It's nothing that won't run its course. That evening, Gemma once again drags Coley to the mangled stag. Coley gets drunk and starts venting about everything, especially how weird Jim is acting and the thing with the police. She says that he's just using the situation to control her and that he must feel guilty about leaving her alone to lose their baby. He doesn't want to face the fact that he abandoned her to climb the hill. It's pretty harsh, and she basically tries to spin the whole thing as him being a narcissist that won't let her process the situation in her own way. Before he can really respond to her, she walks off to use the bathroom. Coley asks for another drink despite the bartender's warning about it getting dark out. After knocking back a few more, the bartender says he's seen this before. In some situations, time is the only answer. He says one of them has something in them that needs to work its way out. Coley just breaks down crying and feels like his marriage is falling apart. At the same time, we see images of a black creature with long fingers ripping the intestines out of a man. Coley feels embarrassed for crying, but the bartender says he's seen harder men cry over less. Plus, he admits it's good for the wallet. Coley then asks if he really believes in the stories. Does he think the Fae are real? The bartender says in Coley and Gemma's case, he thinks they are. Part of the problem with fairies is people don't believe enough or sometimes too much. He then tells the story of Michael Clary and his wife Bridget. Michael had business in Ireland that had him away for long stretches of time. While he was gone, his wife Bridget started making dresses and soon had a thriving business. She was now an independent, self-made woman apart from her husband. When Michael returned, he found a much different person than the woman he left behind, and maybe there was something different about him too. He came to believe that Bridget had been replaced by fairies while he was away. Then one day, she vanished. And when questioned by authorities, Michael claimed that she'd been taken by fairies in the night. Of course, no one believed him, and eventually they searched the house, only to find the burnt and shriveled corpse of Bridget. As far as the police could tell, she'd been tortured for days, burned, force-fed, and beaten. After all, Michael thought she was a changeling and not his wife. This was a shapeshifter, a doppelganger, a double walker. So Michael was arrested, and to this day, the rhyme is still spoken. Are you a witch or are you a fairy? Or are you the wife of Michael Clary? Coley can't believe the man would kill his wife just because he couldn't deal with her being a complete person without him. But the bartender says that that's the thing about the Fae. They like to disrupt things. It's almost always best to submit and let it work itself out. The Fae aren't meant to be in our world, and time will deal with them eventually. Coley turns around and notices that Gemma has disappeared once again. At this point, he's not even surprised and starts walking home alone in the night. Back in their room, Coley finally sees Gemma come in and shouts at her, asking where the hell she went this time. She just says, "I don't know," and Coley lays into her about running off again. She yells back saying she passed out and woke up here, and turns it around on him, asking why he didn't come look for her. They continue fighting until finally Gemma calls him a coward and leaves. After he cools off, Coley feels bad about everything and decides to go after Gemma. Outside, the detectives watch from the car, and Mitchell doesn't understand why they don't do anything, but Patterson tells him in the past when they tried to stop it, it only made things much worse. The last time the massacre was so large, they had to cover it up by calling it a terrorist attack. Mitchell asks what will stop this then, and Patterson says he suspects Coley will put an end to it himself. Coley enters the Stag, angrily looking for Gemma, and the bartender points him toward the back. As he approaches the back door, he sees a pool of blood seeping from the other side of the men's room. He looks inside to find a pile of ripped up body parts. The sight is so revolting that he rushes out through the back door to throw up in the alley. However, when he looks up, he sees something even worse. A horrid, skinny creature with its innards exposed and a skeleton-like face. Coley's fight or flight kicks in and he goes to punch the creature, but stops himself when instead he sees only his naked wife standing in front of him. She runs away, and on the ground is her most recent victim, torn open at the belly. In shock, Coley leaves the alley and stops at a street lamp, wondering what his wife has done. Still watching, Mitchell suggests they tag him right now, but Patterson tells him to wait and keep their distance. It's almost over. Coley rushes back to the bed and breakfast to see if Gemma returned there, and upon entering, he sees the place is all torn up. Worse, he finds Miss Deidre covered in blood as her stomach has been ripped open. She barely mutters out the words, "What have you done?" before letting out her last breath. Just then, Gemma shows up behind them and screams. She actually yells at Coley, accusing him of doing this. After fumbling his words in confusion, Coley finally snaps, grabbing Gemma by the jacket and demanding he get some answers, asking what they did to her and what happened on store. With her face covered in tears, Gemma just says they lost their baby, that's all. Coley screams at her, asking what she did with his wife. She punches him in the face and says she's calling the cops, which he's fine with since he believes she's the killer, but Gemma only laughs and calls him a drunk psycho. He says again that the fairies took her on store, and she just laughs louder. Then, she transforms into the monster from earlier, her guts hanging out of her body and her small frame stretching out as she laughs. It's honestly terrifying. She grabs Coley with her claw-like hand and with the other lifts up his shirt, seemingly ready to slice his belly open like the others. Before she does, she starts yelling as if she's in pain and then puts him down. He takes the opportunity to jump out of the window and run. As he scrambles into the dark woods behind the house, he looks back to see the menacing creature climbing out of the window after him. It chases him until, in the dark, he runs straight into a tree, breaking his nose and leaving him unconscious in the grass. We then see the sharp fingers reach toward him. In his unconscious state, Coley has a bizarre dream. It's partially a memory of he and Gemma talking about her pregnancy and how scary it'll be to become parents. Suddenly, Coley remembers everything that's happened and tells Gemma that that she had a miscarriage on store. She says he's wrong, she's still pregnant. He's not the father anymore, but that's only a technicality. She says that they took that mess out of her and replaced it with something better. The thing she carries transcends the vulgarity of humanity. This sequence is maybe the most uncomfortable of the comic, as she describes the creature moving around inside of her, and she starts to bleed profusely. Finally, she lifts up her shirt to show her exposed organs, and Coley wakes up, thank God. The sun's out now, and he seems perfectly fine besides the large cut on his nose. He makes his way back to the house and grabs a shovel in defense. Then he cautiously enters. Strangely, Deidre's body is gone, and there's no sign of Gemma. Coley searches the house until he finally finds Gemma standing in their room upstairs. He's obviously confused, but things get even weirder. She's smiling and excitedly tells Coley that she's still pregnant. The doctors must have made some kind of mistake. Coley drops the shovel and they embrace as Gemma reassures him it's true, she can feel the baby moving. She says she loves him and they smile. He asks where Deidre went and she says she went into town for groceries. Coley sits down and tries to recount what happened last night, but Gemma chalks it up to him drinking too much and thinks maybe he just had a nervous breakdown. She alludes to another time in New York when something similar happened and Coley breaks down crying and apologizes, feeling like he's losing his mind. Outside, Mitchell wonders if Coley is dead yet and Patterson says that all depends on whether he killed her first. Coley takes a shower to wash off the blood from the night before and afterwards can't stop looking at his reflection in the mirror, almost like trying to make sure that it's still him. Then he notices something sticking out from under the bed. He peeks under to see what it is and finds the dark figure of a body underneath, sat on a pool of blood. He pulls off the mattress to reveal Deidre's mangled body underneath. Just when we thought this was all some kind of delusion, the truth was right there under the bed. Coley grabs the shovel and finds Gemma downstairs. He says nothing and slowly walks toward her. She cries for him to stop, but he raises the shovel and swings down hard, sinking it into his wife's head and splitting it in half. He continues chopping at her until her head is completely disfigured. It might be the most graphic image in this comic. It looks like Coley has finally done it and killed Gemma. Her body goes completely still on the floor until something starts moving under her dress, and long black fingers reach out. A smaller version of the skeletal creature starts to crawl from her womb, and Coley starts smashing it with the shovel until it too is destroyed. He then stumbles outside where the detectives watch from their car. They realize he must have killed her, and Patterson seems alarmed. Mitchell asks if this was part of the plan, but Patterson makes it clear there is no plan. It's just always worse when they try to fight it. Coley gets in a car and screams out in pain about what he just did. Suddenly, he hears a voice and looks over to see himself sitting in the passenger seat. His doppelganger tells him that he should go to store and find the answers. So he starts to drive there, and the detectives follow behind him. As they drive through the hills, we see images of the giant old man of store, again laying down, and many little fairy creatures feasting on his flesh. It's dark now, and little eyes can be seen in the grass on the hill, as well as a large pool of water. Coley fights the wind and rain. Guided by his other self, he climbs the hill looking for the spot Gemma collapsed. He's racked with guilt for leaving her alone that day. Not far behind, the detectives follow. Mitchell asks if it'll all be over when Coley's dead, and how are they going to explain all of this? Patterson admits this was a bad one, much worse than the last time. It seems the Fae are hungrier these days. Mitchell suggests they find some way to feed them, and Patterson says that, long ago, that's exactly what they did. There were lotteries, offerings, sacrifices, and now they just consider it a force of nature. Up ahead on the hill, Coley spots Gemma standing naked in the grass. He chases after her, though the detectives don't see anything. This leads Coley to the pool. He reaches for Gemma, but she dives into the water. The detectives come up behind him and tell him to back away. You may realize we're now back to the first page of the comic. Patterson tries to tell Coley that she's gone, but Coley insists he saw her and that he must save her. He kneels down and believes that he sees Gemma swimming back up to him. He reaches his hand into the pool and soon a face emerges, but it's not Gemma's, but Coley's. Patterson seems alarmed and says he was wrong, and then a giant claw reaches out from the pool surrounding Coley, and that's how Double Walker ends. This ending is obviously a little confusing, and I think that's intentional so that you can interpret it how you like, but I'll kind of go over some details that can explain the ending in two ways. First of all, there's the question of whether the Fae are actually real. The bartender introduced the story of Michael Clary, where a man kills his wife thinking she'd been replaced by the Fae. This is a hint that the same thing could be happening with Coley and Gemma. Maybe Coley can't accept what happened that day on store and has convinced himself that his wife and child have been replaced. I would say it's possible that the Fae aren't real in this story, especially since Coley is the only one to actually witness the monster, except for the fact that the detectives imply this has happened many times before, and Patterson is certain that it's the Fae. Now, you could say that maybe these people are still really superstitious and blame the Fae for the weird events that happen every few years, but ultimately the last page of the comic makes it pretty clear that they can see what's happening in the pool. The other big question, which is more ambiguous, is who is the one that's replaced here? On a first read, it seems obvious that it's Gemma who's been turned into a monster, but after reading it again, I'm not so sure. Maybe Gemma really was just dealing with the shock of child loss in some strange ways, and Coley was the one killing people. Every event involving Gemma and the Fae baby, as well as the murders, were only seen by Coley. Gemma implies he's had some other episode at one point, and I may be reading too deep into it, but when Deidre is dying, she says, "What have you done?" to Coley, when Gemma isn't even around. It just seems odd that she's blaming him. There's also the fact that Patterson says he was wrong at the very end as the giant monster hand comes out of the pool. And let's not forget that the figure that came out at first was Coley. So what was Patterson wrong about? Who the monster really was, or the insistence that everything would blow over if they just waited? Maybe this is only the start of the killings. Anyway, this is all speculation. There's a lot to digest here, but I would love to hear your theories in the comment section. Shout out to Kill Me Katie, as always, for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grief speaking. Goodbye, friends.
Organic